What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Seth Rosczewski podcast. I am your host, Seth, and today we have another episode on Lizzie Borden. We did 3 previously, but now we are entering a 4th episode. I'm with my co-host, Rich. Rich, it's good to see you today.
Good to see you on this Saturday morning. It's beautiful and a nice day here in the Boston area.
Yes, very nice. It's like 80 outside today.
Yeah,
so
that's what they
it's a good
say.
surprise.
And the Red Sox have clinched a spot in the postseason, which is got everybody all excited, and especially the crowd who likes to listen to stories of Lizzie Borden.
Absolutely. Today we are joined by Cara Robertson, the author of The Trial of Lizzie Borden, and she's zooming in with us right now. So, Cara, thank you so much for coming in today and taking the time out of your day to zoom in and talk with us about the case.
It's my pleasure, and the Dodgers are in too. I'm from Los Angeles, so I hope we meet in the World Series.
That'd be awesome. We might have to do a special Lizzie World Series Zoom.
Yes.
We'd have to figure something out.
Yes,
We can make it work.
Now, Cara's out in California,
She is.
and we're here in just south of Boston.
Yep, 3-hour time difference. So thank you for taking the time out of your morning to speak with us. We really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. This is a treat for me.
Lizzie has been really good to both of us, getting the podcast to really outstanding numbers and views. And Rich wrote a book on it, and I'm assuming the same has been for you.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating American story. You know, I call it. It's almost like Sophocles wrote a locked room mystery. You know, because
Right.
it has this mythic quality. You know, if you strip out all the specifics of time and place, it's about this this particular extremely unhappy family in a house together, and then but it's also it's a detective story that has fascinated people for the over 100 years that since it appeared, and that's something that obviously Rich is an expert in.
Sure. So you're out in California, and Lizzie is famous in the Boston and south of Boston area. How did you get into the case? What was your introduction to the case, and what inspired you to write The Trial of Lizzie Borden?
Yeah, many years ago, I was an undergraduate at Harvard, and I was casting about for a topic for my senior thesis, and I'd always been interested in trials. And I thought, well, Lizzie Borden, it's within driving distance of Boston. And I was fascinated by the history of Fall River as well. And it seemed to me, because it was one of those great public trials, sort of like O.J. Simpson, where it attracts the interest of people around the country. It transcends its time and place, that it would be an interesting way to look at the period. It sort of gives you a lens onto that specific moment as well. And then, it's hard to resist an unsolved mystery. So that's how
Absolutely.
I started, and I thought I would be finished with it. And then after becoming a lawyer, I came back to it and wanted to talk, more specifically about the trial.
Sure. Rich, you're up.
Yeah, we know about Lizzie, and we almost feel like you and I believe we both feel like we know Lizzie.
She feels like, at this point with me, she feels like she's like in my life, like I know her as a person. I've done so much research on her.
So Lizzie has a persona that transcends time. Everybody has feelings, sometimes intense feelings, about her either guilt or innocence, and the circumstances which surrounded her when this event occurred. And you said you were here as an undergraduate, and that's how you started. When did you pick it up and then finish your Lizzie book?
So I picked it up again in the teens, after doing different work, but as a lawyer, and working in both the federal judicial system and the international judicial system. So, to a certain extent, my perspective is that of a lawyer, although I did study history as well, American history as well. I think that that, what I tried to do, which is maybe a little different than what you're talking about, is I tried to treat her as the enigmatic character that I thought she was. What struck me reading the transcript, as well as the newspaper accounts, was the way in which people projected their own version of her personality onto actions or behavior that could be read one way or the other. And because she was someone who wasn't famous before the murders, that she was sort of thrust into celebrity, it's hard to find things that are really reliable about her beforehand. So you're left with interpreting her behavior at the time of the murders, how she reacts to the public scrutiny at the trial, and then the bit that we know about her life after the fact. So although it is tough to do, as you say, when you're immersed in the story, you begin to feel like you do know the people. This is sort of a non-spoiler alert. I don't solve the case in my book. Unlike Rich, like I keep a sort of open mind, and allow the readers basically to decide, what they think happened.
Sure. Lizzie is often referred to by her counsel as someone that can, like, we can view her as our daughter, or we could view her as a sister or a family member. They're trying to really push that the younger version of Lizzie, even though she's 32 at the time of the trial. Why do you think they did that, even if she was 32 years old?
Yeah, I think that's a clever lawyer strategy. That if she's a helpless girl, then that makes her an even more unlikely murderer. So, I mean, what you're talking about, Seth, is essentially one of the key things in the battle over the representation of Lizzie Borden at the trial. Like, is she really this just innocent who's just caught up in this terrible story, just by virtue of the fact that she's related to the victims and she happened to be home at the time? Or is she some sort of calculating murderess with, Amazonian strength, or perhaps some sort of insanity that caused her to flip and do this terrible thing? And you see that those are the sort of dual poles that that's the ground on which the trial really takes place. It's as much about the battle over her character as it is about the evidence.
Sure. Rich, what do you got?
There's a whole cast of interesting characters in the Lizzie Borden case, in the Lizzie Borden trial, and when the investigation started, and of course, it had to start on the worst day that it possibly could, as far as the Fall River Police Department. That was the day that half the department was in Rhode Island for a annual cookout at Rocky Point, and so they were shorthanded when they started. The chief of police, Hilliard, tried to do the best he could. Marshal Hilliard tried to do the best he could and get things going. Did you find it interesting that Lizzie was the one who discovered her father's remains, and she immediately sent for help? And she immediately had someone try to contact someone, and the police were notified, but not before the local newspapers were notified first, before the police department received their phone call. Because the Borden house did not have a phone, and businesses did have a phone, and that's how the police department was notified. But did you find that interesting that the press were on the scene almost before the police were on the scene? And that kind of contributed to the whole scenario of how this whole story built, depending on what reporter was reporting and what he reported.
Yeah, Rich, I think that's a really good point. I mean, because you see from the beginning that this is set up to be a sensation, that they're aware that this is going to be a really big, important story. And I think and perhaps you did as well, I found it really shocking the number of people just wandering through the crime scene on the morning of the discovery. I mean, that's why we have some firsthand accounts that aren't just from the police, because everybody and their second cousin seemed to be able to walk in, and then you also have the added thing, the aspect of this, which is that early on everybody seems to want to be a detective as well. You have citizens trying the who are friends of the board and trying the door, looking in the closets, that sort of thing as well. So, I mean, if part of what you're getting at too is like, was this a really good investigation? It's hard to say that it was. I mean, I think they were a bit overwhelmed, and she came under suspicion pretty early. I mean, given that it appeared that the outdoor access to the house was limited, that there were a number of people on the street. It just seemed like it had to be somebody inside, not necessarily. I mean, the defense attacks this line at the trial, but you can see from the police perspective how they turn their attention pretty quickly to the people who were actually in the house.
Something that I seem to bring up on every single show that we do, whether it's the Black Dahlia, whether it's the Chappaquiddick incident, whether it's the Kennedy assassination, and so on, and D.B. Cooper, so on and so forth. One constant theme is preservation of evidence. And granted, this happened in 1892. Could the preservation of evidence, had they been more forward-thinking, helped solve this case? And what evidence would we have needed to be preserved to solve this case with modern technology?
Well, I think if we had it now, you could do things like test for DNA, and it might offer a solution. I mean, we can talk about the technical aspect of that if you're interested, but they did their sort of CSI Fall River best. They counted all the blood spatter. They picked up bits of carpeting and fabric for testing. I know you two have talked about the autopsy and also sending the stomachs off to rule out poison, things like that. And then obviously the main thing was trying to figure out, did they actually have the murder weapon or not? So it's hard to judge. I mean, I guess the question is, are you judging it against the standards of the time versus are you judging based on what they would have done now? And it's hard to look back on it and not think this could have been handled better. But at the time, and particularly as Rich points out, when this was a particularly awkward day for the sort of murder that was not typical in Fall River, when the police were on their annual picnic. I think they sort of did the best they could within their limitations.
The defense seems to throw out the prussic acid argument, saying, well, it could be used for other things. It's not so much just medicine or poison. And we don't even know if it was her. That's kind of the approach they took from what I gathered from reading your book. How do you feel about the whole prussic acid ordeal?
Well, again, I'm a lawyer, so it goes to intent if it's true, right? So the point is not so much that the point is that if Lizzie Borden had in fact tried to buy prussic acid on the day before the murders, and you believe that was intended to kill somebody, as opposed to the explanation given by the woman, whether she was Lizzie Borden or not, asking for the prussic acid on that day, namely that it was to kill, moths in a sealskin cape, or clean a sealskin cape, then it offers a way to puncture the biggest problem for the prosecution, which is like, why would Lizzie Borden, someone who ticks all the boxes of feminine respectability in this era, her charitable interests were something that I know you and Rich have talked about before. But she's sort of a model. She's a model character in many respects, a Sunday school teacher. And so how do you link her to something so brutal? Not just the murder of her stepmother and her father, which are just intrinsically horrible, but a murder in that way, which is something that is much more male coded. I'd say that, a hatchet or an axe murder is something that is much more associated with men, whereas poison is a quote unquote women's weapon. And so if you could show that she was intending to poison them and then couldn't get the poison, then that is a way to suggest that, well, in desperation, she might well have picked up a readily available household weapon, because every house had hatchets and axes in that era.
So, Rich, you kind of outline a theory with the battle between masculinity and femininity when discussing this type of crime. Like the axe murder be a male kind of crime and the poison be a female crime. And you have a theory which outlines John Morse as your primary suspect.
Well, the reason that John Morse came to me as a possible suspect, and the evidence that I used was two simple pieces of evidence, and I include that as a separate page that I insert in every book that goes out. One is the testimony written by Officer William Medley, who investigated Uncle John's alibi on the afternoon, early evening of the day of this crime, the 4th of August. And the newspaper report by the Fall River Herald, which came out the following day on the 5th, Friday the 5th, where a reporter went to the same house that Officer Medley went to check out Uncle John's alibi, and the story that the lady of the house, Mrs. Emery, who was a relative of John Morse, indicated that John Morse and Dr. Bowen happened to be at that location. Dr. Bowen was there visiting an ill relative of Mrs. Emery and also John Morse, and that she was asked by the reporter, did they see each other? And she said, I don't think so. Well, the fact that they were there at the same time, and then the Dr. Bowen was back at the Borden residence at approximately 11:25 that afternoon, does not corroborate Uncle John's alibi. I think his alibi doesn't hold water. And unfortunately, I think that he was a witness for the prosecution early on, and they didn't ask him difficult questions. I don't know how Cara views that, but that often happens in a case where somebody becomes a witness for the prosecution and they are not asked questions about the case.
Yeah, I really like what Rich has done in terms of investigating John Morse's alibi, because he's the one in the story who has this alibi that's out of an Agatha Christie novel. It's just almost an invitation for further exploration. It's so perfect, right? With the remembering the cap number of the horse car driver, the priest, the whole story. I know you two have discussed it before, so I won't repeat it here. But so he seems to be in the clear, even though he is a kind of inherently suspicious character. I mean, he's the one who's come in from the outside. I mean, I would say that they that it's still pretty tight. I mean, to make him the murderer, and I guess I'm a little more suspicious about the motivation. In other words, we know this is a family with a lot of tension, and we know there was this property dispute, and even though the Bordens were ill before the crime with what was colloquially called the summer complaint, because they excuse me, because they had some food that was probably a bit spoiled. And I know you two have discussed that. So once again, no need to go into the disgusting details. I should say, as a side note, there's a whole literature on the disgusting food at the Borden house. It seems to be like a subgenre of writing about the case. But anyway, back to Uncle John. So he's gone, and then so he seems to have this perfect alibi, and then he returns and behaves very suspiciously, which is that he goes into the yard and he's eating these pears, and he doesn't seem to notice that anything strange has happened in the house. And by this point, Lizzie's already discovered her father's body. So you would think he'd notice that there's somebody posted at the door, that there's some strange things. So there's a lot that's suspicious about him, and as and as you probably discussed, he had to be rescued from a mob who thought that he was really the likeliest killer. So maybe instead of treating you to further monologue on that, I should just pause. And I'm not sure if I answered the question, or if that's the route you want to go down. I mean, as I said, I think I'm probably a little more interested in the reasons the different people were suspected and then ruled out, and the way in which the lawyers chose to argue the case, because that shows you not just what they thought, and I from my own primary research, I would say that they believed the respective ones believed their stories. The prosecutors really thought she'd done it. I mean, even though they were quite reluctant to bring the case, and the defense lawyers believed she was innocent. I don't think it was just for the money, right? So, but they have to frame their arguments in a way that makes sense to them, but also are going to convince a representative jury, or at least a jury, as I know you've discussed, of men of that era. That's something that is going to make sense.
This seems to me it's. I guess what I'm trying to ask is, what does Lizzie's demeanor during the trial say about her? She kept very straight face, cold, little emotion. I know when she was found not guilty, she put her head down and sobbed. And there were other points throughout the trial where she started to break down, like seeing the skull, she fainted, and there's various other little ones. What does her demeanor say? Or is that just typical for the time?
Well, Seth, I think you've hit on exactly the central question, right? That's what everybody was looking at. Like what does this mean? Is this evidence of guilt, or is this evidence of just fortitude? And you see the most prominent newspaper columnists of their day who were dispatched to cover the trial. You see them grappling with exactly this question, and the lawyers have to make it explicit as well, because they want to explain it to the jury. And so you have a split. You have a split where the people who are hostile to Lizzie Borden, or maybe more precisely, are the people who think she did it for whatever reason, are much more inclined to see that as evidence of this sort of odd coolness. One of the local papers that was really more for Irish Catholics than the Protestant community that she came from, called her the Sphinx of coolness. This idea that there's something, this kind of blankness, this is highly suspicious, and maybe even in the words of one writer, maybe this sort of masculine nerve. Right. But the people who are sympathetic to her, and her own defense lawyers, paint her in much more maudlin terms and talk about how much she's grieving the loss of her father, and tries to make her seem as young as possible, and talks about the baby fingers um, holding her father's hand and emphasize this, to modern ears, slightly creepy detail of the father wearing Lizzie's ring as a token of affection and connection. So, in other words, what do I think is real? I can't. That's not a question that I think you can resolve after the fact. But I do think that it is sort of the central question, because it's almost as if people decide what that means, and then they decide if she did it or not.
Let's talk about your book and my book. And what are your thoughts about the negative comments that you get about your book and I get about my book?
Well, they're wrong, of course, Rich.
Yes. and it seems like the reader who reads your book and reads my book, when they disagree with our position, they trash our book rather than examine what we're trying to do is just report what we believe. And I find, because I'm in the local area of Lizzie Borden, I get a lot of speaking engagements, especially towards down around Rhode Island, Tiverton and Portsmouth, and which are relatively close to Fall River. And people get angry that I have defended her because they know she's guilty. And then there are others who they're cheering me because they agree with the fact that they know that she's innocent. Do you get that feeling from people who comment on your book that there's real feelings about this case 133 years later?
Yeah, it is fascinating, right? That this is a case that really inspires strong passions even now. And I do find that. I mean, the number one question I get is, did she do it or not? And also, the people who ask that almost always have a very strong opinion about what they think, which is, I think, what you're getting at. And, they want you to agree with them.
Exactly.
And as you've, and as having gone so deeply into the source material, it's tricky. I mean, you make an argument in your case, but part of the way that you do that is that you take the reader into Lizzie Borden's perspective, right?
Yes.
And I didn't think, as a nonfiction writer, I could do that, right? So so in my case, I mean, you could say that I'm at a little more of a remove, where I'm writing about people who have interpretations instead of drawing the interpretation myself, which I can tell you some people found super frustrating and weren't happy about. But that's what makes it a good story. And I mean, I just add from my own perspective, and I think that, well, I should phrase it as a question as opposed to just making a comment. But, I'm assuming that what motivated you to write the book was that, you found the conventional explanation sort of unsatisfactory. And so you did this deep research into the material and had your own interpretation. So I think that people find that to be true, and maybe they read all the books about it, but they probably don't do the kind of research that you or I did.
Well, my research started by accident. My daughter has an interest in this case, and probably 30 years ago, on my birthday, we went down to the Lizzie Borden bed and breakfast / museum, and it was recently opened. For years, it had been a print shop. There was a print shop that was attached, and I remember when the print shop was attached to that building at 238 2nd Street. And so we went down and we toured the house. And at that time, my opinion went along with the little jump rope rhyme about the 40 wax, and that she indeed was probably guilty. And then in about 2010, a fellow author up in Canada and I got together and we started putting together crimes that we thought that there was injustice in the crime. And Lizzie Borden happened to be one of the cases. And so we got deeply into it. And her name is Bev Folstadt, and she is the person who wrote Lizzie's perspective throughout the book, because I thought a woman's perspective of how it would feel to be accused, how it would feel to be incarcerated, and how it would feel to be tried for a crime of committing your stepmother and father, a woman's view would add to the book, and that's why Bev and I wrote that, and I hope she's watching today. And
Hi, Bev.
yes, thank you. And that's how I got started, and then I expanded that to that topic in the study that we're doing into an entire book. And that's how I got interested. And the deeper I got, the more interested I got in the particular characters that were in the book, especially Uncle John, Bridget Sullivan. There's another interesting, and people have written about the scenario that they construed that there was a connection, a love connection between her and Lizzie. And I found nothing of that in my research. But there's all sorts of connections, and a lot of people have played off of those. And there's been so many different slants on the Lizzie Borden case about the evil stepbrother Willie. And you probably heard that one, which probably has no ounce of truth to it at all, but somebody wrote a book about it. And so it all depends on how you view things.
Yeah, I think that what's so interesting about the case is that people have found, the raw material for lots of fictionalizations in it. So that this is a case that's been retold not just as a true crime story, but it's been turned into novels and plays and operas and musicals. And what strikes me really are two things. One is that, those interpretations tend to tell you more about the moment in which they're written than they do about the actual murders, right? For the reasons that we've talked about, is that it's about the sort of the story of it, not the actual context of the case and the provable parts from the original documents. And then the second thing is that there's something missing in the story for many of the people who want to retell it. That they want to make it a romance in some way. So I mean, I think that's the impulse behind this sort of new interest in Bridget Sullivan as a possible love interest, because she has the advantage of being right in the house. She's sort of hiding in plain sight. But before that, as you know, there are many fictionalizations of the story in which Lizzie is assigned a kind of, some kind of either inaccessible or inappropriate love interest, and that's given as a reason for the murders, that her father stood in the way in some way, and. As you know, the hoax story that the Boston Globe ran after the murders, that the unscrupulous detective McHenry told the unfortunately named reporter Henry Tricky, thus creating the Tricky Henry affair, featured John Morse as the illicit lover of his niece. And then alleged that this argument had taken place between the elder Bordens and Lizzie and John, and that was the reason for the murders. And we know that was just a complete phony story that ended Tricky's career and then ultimately his life.
Exactly.
But I do think it gets at something that there, there's something that, it almost seems like the story needs a little bit more, for people to fully make sense of it or for it to be satisfying. I take the opposite view, which is that it's so compelling because you can't really solve it totally. Because even if you come up with a who, as you do, whether or not I pick the same person, you can't really get at the why. I mean, because of the brutality of the crimes. They're so horrible that it's hard to think of just an ordinary motive that would result in something like that.
On the topic of the brutality, do you think that the prosecution had the proper murder weapon? Do you think that they actually had the physical weapon, or do you think that it was just thrown on a roof and it was found however many months or years later? I forget.
Right.
How long was it? I forget. It was found.
They found it right at the end of the trial, or rather, they found a hatchet. I shouldn't say that it was the hatchet, but they did find one at the end of the trial, and then it just sort of disappears from the story. It's crazy. And then I believe subsequent to that, there have been various weapons of different kinds that have been found. I mean, all I can say is what the medical experts testified to, which is that this, what was called the handleless hatchet, could have made all the wounds. On the other hand, we do know that there's some. We know that there's some disagreement about that because the police had originally picked another weapon as the likely murder weapon, and they were clearly wrong about that. And there is also a dispute about the finding of this weapon among the police officers. That's a particularly good day for the defense because it looks like to an observer who's looking for evidence against Lizzie Borden. As you know, the handleless hatchet is handleless because the handle was broken off and was gone, and it had been put into the basement among other sort of disused implements and covered with, according to the police officer who testified to the discovery, covered with a sort of fine ash. As opposed to the dust that had covered the other unused or lesser used weaponry in the Borden household. But we also know that one of his fellow officers contradicted him. So that's a very long answer to say that, yeah, it seems like they got the right weapon, but like many things in the story, we don't. It's another thing we'll never really know.
If this happened today, is it solvable?
Yeah, I think so. One, because of just the scientific advances, so there were things that could be ruled in or out. You may know Bill James, if you're a baseball fan. He's the father of, I think they call it sabermetrics, but anyway, he's written a book about various kinds of popular crime, and unsurprisingly, he's got a numerical or statistical basis for determining guilt or innocence. And he strongly believes that Lizzie Borden didn't do it, and that forensics would have ruled her out right away. For me, the biggest barrier isn't that. The biggest barrier is the problem with seeing her as a real candidate for the murder. I mean, we know that the prosecution did think she did it, but they worked hard to look for insanity in the family and really couldn't find it. They looked for a way out because they really struggled with the idea of someone like Lizzie Borden, someone who, as I mentioned, ticks all the boxes of respectable femininity in that era. The idea of doing something so horrible in that manner. And I think today, for better or for worse, I mean, we understand that women can do terrible things too.
Sure. Rich?
Yeah, I have one final quick question. Right around the time they were getting the jury together, selection. There was another axe murder in Fall River, a girl by the name of Bertha Manchester. And they immediately went into sequestering the jury after that. Do you think that Manchester murder, at the time of the jury selection, could have affected the decision of the jury that there was something else going on out there? Do you think that
Yeah,
would
I
be
think
possible?
I think that's a good point that you know what the jurors knew was that there had been this other axe murder, and this one fit the profile. I mean, they didn't know that it had been solved, but you know, this was a mentally ill Portuguese immigrant who killed the daughter of a prosperous farmer with an axe over a dispute about wages. So that, you know, that's sort of the fantasy of nativists and everywhere, you know, that's exactly the sort of murder that they might have been expecting.
Exactly.
Whereas, you know, contrasted with these elderly people allegedly killed by their own daughter, or at least by the man's daughter, you know, just in their home for what seemed like incomprehensible motives.
The jury deliberated for about 90 minutes. What does that say about the case? Because to me, a layperson, I work in TV. I'm not in the law at all. That shows to me that it was, you know, written and it was closed, done quickly. Like, to me, it just shows that like it wasn't really a discussion. Like, okay, she's not guilty. Here's the evidence. Yep, no one. Okay, all right, not guilty. How does
Yeah,
that?
I think
Yeah.
that I mean, I think that's the way I read it too, that you know, we know they were unanimous on the first ballot, and we know also that they sort of stayed in the room for longer just out of respect for the prosecutor and to make it seem like they'd been reasonably deliberative. Um, so that says to me that you know, these were people who really never at that point, or at least by that point, maybe I should say, um, just thought this really wasn't a case about reasonable doubt or whether or not it could be proved. It was more like this could not have happened the way that the prosecution said it did. You know, in other words, this is not the sort of person who could have done this. You know, so in a sense, I think it all goes back to your original question, which is the who is Lizzie Borden? You know, how do you interpret her? How do you interpret her demeanor? What do you make of her character? And I think it was just too threatening of an idea that someone like her, who had appeared before them, you know, beautifully dressed, her hair, you know, fixed between sessions, you know, someone who just looked like one of their daughters or wives. The idea that she was accused of such a thing just seemed like this, you know, this doesn't make any sense to us.
Sure. Will this case ever get solved?
Well, I don't think so, though, you know, obviously Rich may disagree with me on that. But I think that I think that part of the reason for its endurance is that it is an unsolved mystery, right? That there is a way in which that draws you in, because it really can never, once someone's been tried but then acquitted, it really can't be definitively solved. I mean, she has been convicted in rhyme,
Sure.
and that's what most people think. But we know that acquittals, you know, are just a little more open-ended. We don't know whether, with more evidence, you know, for example, had the poison evidence come in, had the evidence about her own shifting stories at the inquest come in, whether that would have changed things. What we do know is the same thing they knew at the time, is that, you know, there is a very tight timeline and and a really upsetting murder or set of murders. And it's, you know, I don't think anyone wants to think that a daughter would do that to her father and stepmother. Though incidentally, the people seem to be able to understand the stepmother, which has always struck me as quite unfair, as she seems to be by far the nicest person in the story.
Rich.
Well, and she does, and she was, by all accounts, Lizzie Borden's mother for a good portion of Lizzie's life, because she brought Lizzie up. Lizzie was a child when Andrew married Abby, and I've always said if there was an oddball in this whole story, it was the older sister Emma, who, because of the age difference, she was much older, and there could possibly be animosity between her and the stepmother. And as far as Seth, you asked if I thought, or if Cara thought, that this would ever be solved. I think in 133 more years we won't, but others will be still talking about this case, and probably still writing books about this case, because it's one of those interesting stories that builds upon itself. I'm sorry to say that down in Fall River, the story of Lizzie Borden has gone paranormal. That seems to be the buzzword in the area now. You and I, Cara, did not get into that at all, thank goodness. But that's opens a whole other line of stories to continue the saga of Lizzie Borden.
Right. I mean, the paranormal researchers, I think, probably think they have some direct access
Exactly.
to the main characters, something that we can only get through the records.
Right.
Where can people find your book, and do you have any future projects coming up?
Yes, thanks for asking. You can get my book either at Simon & Schuster or at Amazon or any fine local independent bookstore. And a fine local independent bookstore is what I recommend, or failing that, the library. And I have a website, which is just my name, carawrobertson.com. And if you have any follow-up questions, I'm always happy to chat about Lizzie Borden. And I'm often in the area because my next project involves a Providence murder. The murder actually took place in Denver, but the murder victim was originally from Providence, as was the alleged murderer. It was America's first murder by mail, where a poisoned bottle that was supposed to be whiskey was sent via the U.S. mail to the murder victim. So I'm enjoying that, and I'm enjoying having time back in my old haunts after some absence. So, Rich, if you're around, maybe we can get together in person and hash over the weeds of the case.
That would be great. That would be a lot of fun.
But Cara, thank you so much for coming on to the show. I really appreciate it. And I know the audience loves Lizzie. Definitely by far our most popular subject to talk about as far as the audience views and stuff.
Well, thanks. I really appreciate the opportunity. It was fun to talk with both of you. And also, I look forward to your other shows.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. If you guys want to support the show, you guys can subscribe, like, comment. You guys can also find all of Cara's links in the description below. And Rich Little wrote his book. Rich, you got it right there. You can probably show the camera. Cold Case to Case Closed by Rich and Bev. That will also be in the description below as well. You can shop those on Amazon, both on Amazon, if you'd like. And yeah, and Rich has got Cara's book right here as well. There we go. But thank you both for coming on to the show today and talking about Lizzie.
Thank you, Cara.
Ttake care.
All right. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. I'll see you guys next week. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.